Happy Friday Eve.
Hey, I'm sorry, you broke up there. Just call me.
Happy Friday Eve.
Oh yeah, happy Friday Eve. How's your week been?
Been good, man. Been good. Been flying by. Yeah, it's hard to believe it's almost Friday. How's yours been?
It's been busy, man. I can't complain though. Busy is good.
Yeah. Well, it's exciting, man. We have a good show today and tomorrow. It'll be fun to dive into training, and we have a new sponsor to announce as well. So I guess to start off, thanks for Trio doing all of our back end. If you're looking for nearshoring, offshoring, great company. I know Will uses them. HG Ships. If you're looking to be an agent, definitely shoot me a message. And Sales Dash Will also uses. Josh has been a good friend of mine. It's freight specific CRM. CRMs are key for for sales, obviously. And I don't know if you want to break down to our new one, multi-service fuel card, which is we're really excited to have as well.
Yeah, we are very excited to have multi-service on as a sponsor. They're a fuel card. They were started by an over-the-road trucker way back when, and they're a good fuel provider if you're looking for discounts to optimize your fleet. They're a great group to work with. There's a lot of drivers actually that speak very highly of them. Some past guests, Texas Trucker, for example. If anybody tuned into our big Friday show with John Rogers and all of them, they work with multi-service and have nothing but great things to say about them. And of course, my company, Black Box Logistics, we're onboarding for 1014. If anybody in the Birmingham area is looking for a change or looking to get into logistics.
100%. You're having your grand opening in October. It's exciting.
Yeah, we're getting the details ironed out, but I mean, hopefully we'll be in there next month, and then we'll have an event. So, hopefully. Well, I guess you can't make it down because of the broker carrier conference, but yeah, we should have a big group out there, and yeah, we're very excited about it.
Oh, definitely. You got our brought to by Tafts as well, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, and then our can't forget Tafts here, factoring company. They're a great group to work with. Matt shared on his LinkedIn. Hit a carrier asking him about his contract, and we reached out to Tafts, and it was 8 p.m. and the rep was willing to talk to him on the cell phone on like a Wednesday night. So they're a great group to work with if you're looking for factoring or maybe a swap from your current factoring company.
Yeah, 100%. Can't say enough about them. Especially communication's key, obviously, in logistics, and they have people answering the phones, live people to midnight during the week, and it's a great company.
Yeah, for sure. Last week we were TMS centric. This week we're diving into training, and I'm really excited about this guest. I've been following him for quite some time on LinkedIn. He's constantly posting great tidbits, tips for brokers or anybody involved in transportation. So we'll go ahead and bring him out, let him introduce himself. For episode 18, we've got Nick Dangles. Nick, how are you?
Hey, Will, Matt, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, of course. I love what you guys are doing.
Awesome. Yeah.
Well, training. We love talking about training, and Will and I were both saying we love seeing your posts on LinkedIn and talking about you have a lot of experience in the industry, and we're excited to have you. I guess if you want to start, we kind of ask everyone this, but kind of what's your background in logistics? How did you fall into it, or maybe you planned on getting in it? But just kind of tell us a little about your history.
No, so I definitely did not plan on getting into the industry. I don't think most people do. So my background prior to logistics is I was briefly a lawyer in my 20s, but we only have an hour in the podcast, so suffice to say that it wasn't a good fit for me, and I was trying to get into something different. And from there, I was trying to find a sales job. I was both overqualified and underqualified for all sales jobs, right? I'm a 28-year-old dude with a law degree who has never done sales before. So no one's hiring me for experienced sales jobs. No one's hiring me for entry-level sales jobs because they figure I'm going to bounce in 6 months anyway. So I end up selling office supplies door to door for Quill for 8 months. Absolutely miserable. Learned a ton though. If anyone ever wants to cut their teeth in sales, I recommend door-to-door sales. It's genuinely terrible, but you will learn a lot. And then from there, I kind of fell into logistics. I was introduced to Charlie Safro actually as a recruiter. And one of her employees at the time, Beth, placed me at a small brokerage brokerage called Optimal Freight. And the rest is history. I've been in the industry for probably 12 to 15 years now. 10 of that was in brokerage. So I spent a lot of time brokering freight. And then about 4 years ago, I got out of brokerage, did a little bit of consulting for a while. And then like a year and a half, 2 years ago, we started up Sync Logistics Training. So I'm glad you enjoy talking about training, because I too talk about training a lot. And that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Yeah, we appreciate you sharing. Door-to-door sales is, man, that's a different type of grind, right? A lot of people are nervous or apprehensive about cold calls. Door-to-door is a whole different level, right? So I'm sure that, doing that before moving to freight, I'm sure made the freight sales a little bit easier. When you joined Optimal Freight, what kind of position was it in? Was it cradle to grave, or what was your role when you started out?
You know, it was a small brokerage at the time. So like we were probably 10 people or less when I came on board there. And like it was largely cradle to grave at that point. You know, like I was kind of more leaning towards the customer / account management side, but like I spent my time the first couple of months kind of just doing tracking. And then from there, I went into kind of like a traditional hot pod-ish type of carrier sales role. And then I kind of transitioned into more account management and customer sales. But at the same time, like we were small, you know, like I had to wear a lot of different hats in that role. And it's funny that you mentioned the transition from door-to-door sales to kind of like the cold calling sales and brokerage. Like I'll never forget interviewing for my first brokerage job, and Noam, like my former boss at Optimal who I was interviewing with, he's like, Nick, in this job, you're going to have to make like 100 phone calls a day at least. Do you think you're going to be okay with that? And I just remember sitting there thinking to myself and telling him, listen, I am currently, and it's like April or something, so I just finished like door-to-door sales in like Chicago in the winter. Like, you mean to tell me all I have to do is sit in this office in the climate controlled environment in my chair with my little Bluetooth headpiece and just make phone calls? Like, we're gonna be fine, you know? So yeah, like way easier than door-to-door sales.
Yeah, we have a lot of conversations. So I'm down in Birmingham, Alabama, and during the summer it gets quite hot, right? So when we're doing interviews, a lot of times, the majority of the people that we hire and onboard are green and freight, right? They don't have a freight background. A lot of them are coming from construction, that sort of thing. We'll have a similar conversation. Hey, it's a lot of calls. There's like, buddy, I just worked in 110 degree heat for 12 hours. Like, I'll make the calls. They're just like, yeah, you're right. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll never forget. It's like, it's going to be fine, man. We're going to be okay with the phone calls in the air conditioned office. Lo and behold, we were.
How was training kind of back in that day? I know you said, you know, you've been in it for 10 to at least 10 years plus. How was training, you know, a lot different back then, or was it a lot more kind of throw it to the wolves, or what? I mean, obviously you're in Chicago and you have your own experience, but you probably see, you know, talk to a lot of people. How was kind of the, you know, training back then compared to maybe how it is, you know, nowadays, or is it much different?
You know, I think like one of the reasons why we wanted to create Sync is because honestly, it's not that different, you know, like best in class training at the time. I mean, like your top brokerages always had good training ever since like early 90s or whatever they came about. But the reality is like the training hasn't really changed since then, you know, and like that's part of the problem. You need to evolve your training over time. And there's always a big difference in training across brokers of different levels of sophistication, right? I mean, like your like $1 billion company versus your small like mom and pop shop have very different standards for training. And I think you still see that to this day, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that you kind of point out some things haven't changed. Like maybe some fundamentals are timeless, right? You know, service and that sort of things. But then you come into 2024 and a lot of tech coming into the market and that sort of thing. So I would imagine that, I don't know, maybe some of those tools have changed the training, or even, you know, coming from a company like Optimal Freight where there's 10 people, you're wearing a lot of hats. So it's not as, you know, clear and cut and dry SOPs like, hey, you do this, how you handle this, but it's kind of just like, let's just, you know, go get the loads moved. It's kind of messy, I would imagine.
Oh yeah. And like that's the small to mid-sized brokers they're the ones who struggle the most with training, right? Because a lot of time you're so focused on just surviving every day that you just don't have the time or the bandwidth to like pull managers aside to train people and to deliver live trainings, much less create all of this training material that you need. So like the struggle is real for all brokers, but it really hits home for the small and mid-sized folks who just don't have the bandwidth to do all of this stuff.
Yeah, man, I'll say for us, a big thing, I mean, that was a big hurdle that we've tried to address from when we started, because again, everybody's wearing lots of hats, right? So maybe the guy that like I want training everybody, he's moving a bunch of freight, so I can't pull him off of that for him to go train them. And then it's, you know, you're when you're smaller, or at least my experience, our experience as a company is there's a trade-off, right? And training, you can't really sacrifice training. Like those are your people, you got to invest in the people, but at the same time, the immediate hit when you're smaller, you're taking the one that you want to train is probably producing. So it's tough to manage, right? And or even you don't have it built out like a CH Robinson does. You know, they've got it, you know, end to end, right? Continued training. When you're smaller, it can be tough. And I think it's an often neglected thing, or you know, they come in the first 30 days, they get trained, and then they're thrown to the wolves. But hey, man, the train doesn't stop after 30 days. I mean, I'm still learning through brokering now, right? Like, I mean, every single week, I feel like I'm learning new things.
You hit on so many things there that are really common talking points for me. I'm going to briefly hit on two of them specifically, because you were talking about kind of pulling some of those high performers off the floor because they're the ones that you want training people or something to that effect, right? Yep. And like you're spot on. That's a struggle that a lot of brokers have. And we kind of call it the management burden of training, you know, because like, no, I don't care how big you are, you're pulling somebody into these training sessions. When you're smaller, it's probably a manager, right? And they probably have their own carriers that they're running. They probably have their own accounts that they're managing, whatever the case may be. And like, you're taking them away from a revenue creating thing to do this training. And like, it sucks. Admittedly, it sucks, right? But even if you're larger, right, you're pulling a training manager or somebody like that off of their other responsibilities to go do this live training. And nobody wants to do it. Everybody has other things that they want to be doing. So that's always a challenge for everybody. And like specifically going to kind of pulling those high performers out to administer this training, the problem you run into there is, dude, they're really good at brokering freight. They might be genuinely terrible at training people. Yeah. Right? Like a lot of the qualities about them that makes them a good freight broker makes them a really terrible trainer.
100%.
You know? Like you got this guy he's like ADD going a million miles a minute trying to teach this poor person who's never been in freight before. And like, how much of that actually gets through, you know? So like, that's another challenge that we see with a lot of brokers out there.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that is a great point. I mean, I think of just some of the top performers, you know, I know, and you know, I know they're actually top performers, whether I worked with them or I've seen their numbers or what they do. And some of them definitely have personalities that would not translate very well to coaching or teaching. And I wonder how many brokerage owners, you know, think about that when they're deciding training, or some of them are just like, well, these guys are our best producers, so we gotta, you know, just throw them to, you know, handle all the training. I kind of wonder what the thought process is of brokerage owners there. But
well, I'll say for us, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with what Nick's saying. So, man, I'm one of those people. The fresh, like, new training is something I've struggled with. I'm just not good at it. I move quickly and maybe like too fast, right? And I expect people to retain things when I tell them one time that I don't have the patience for it. I move very quickly. I'm all over the place. So I don't do the new training. My partner Logan does, and our office manager Brimley, and they do a fantastic job. And then I do like kind of our team leads advanced training where they're kind of up to speed. But I can't do I don't want to say I can't, right? It's something that I could grow into, right? But it's something that I fundamentally struggle with as a leader or somebody in this company with the new training and over the basics. It's just not a good fit for me, but I'm good at brokering freight, but the new training is something I'm not good at all.
You're not alone. It's like, the reason I mention it is because I hear it across the board with a bunch of brokers that I talk to, right? And it's not just like, the problem isn't just the stuff that I mentioned. It becomes problematic in other ways too. A big one is consistency, right? If you're exclusively relying on your high performers to train people, I guarantee a lot of the time that training is, hey man, I know how we're supposed to do things, but this is how I do things and it works. So just do things my way. You know, I guarantee that happens. I guarantee it, you know? Yeah, and this way, when you have like Yeah, when you have like 5 or 6 different high performers all training different people, they're learning how to do things 5 or 6 completely different ways, and you have no consistency across your organization.
So that point,
I saw Matt smiling at one of those things.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering kind of like how, because I agree with that. How do you decide which parts to put in? Because I've obviously seen your product. You gave me a demo. I think it's fantastic. How did you decide kind of putting together that content? Did you go to multiple different high performers? Did you talk to different owners, or kind of what went into creating kind of the content on your site?
No, that's a good question. And we wanted to design it around what we kind of consider to be like industry standard best practices, if you will, right? And it's not just me sitting here like typing up random things. We leverage a bunch of different like subject matter experts from Metaphora. I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but Sync is a joint venture between my company, Kinetic, and the guys over at Metaphora. They have subject matter experts on their team who have been in the industry for a long, long time. And we work together to kind of build out this content. So that's where it comes from. It's not just me sitting here in my townhome in Chicago cooking up content. It's been a group effort through a lot of people with a lot of different experience.
I think that's important too, because you see, and it's kind of difficult for people out there now, not to go into a rabbit hole, but I mean, people on YouTube selling courses, how to make $1 million as a broker. There's tons of courses on LinkedIn, buy this course. And, it's a lot of, I think what you mentioned, just people typing it up and say, hey, here's a course, and then using, good marketing, but what, type of experience, what type of thought has gone into that, then people buy the course and wonder, hey, why didn't I make $1 million?
Yeah. And honestly, kind of going through some of this content with some of the subject matter experts we talked to really shed light for me on how little I know about certain things. Like I have very niche experience, I guess. Like I'm a full truckload broker who's worked in probably like small to mid-sized brokerages, and I've worn a lot of hats. I've never like specialized in carrier sales, is a good example. So I ended up working with this guy, Adam Perlmutter, over at Metaphora. And this guy knows more about carrier sales than anyone I've ever talked to in my life. It's ridiculous. Like he starts rattling off these courses that we should go through and kind of what we should put in them. And I'm just like, dude, slow down. I've never even thought about some of these things that you're talking about right now. It's all amazing. But like it really made me kind of reflect on what I knew and like how I had been doing things previously. So like getting that different exposure, I'm going somewhere with this. Like particularly when we talk to some brokers who like they've got a lot of experience, right? But sometimes it's a very experienced broker that's like 10 people who have all been working at the same brokerage for the past 20 years. And all they know is that brokerage's way of doing things. So like some of our brokerages, like they've really seen value in Sync just because it gives them exposure to different ideas. That was a really roundabout way of getting to that point, but
no, it was good. It was a good explanation. And I kind of would think a lot of education, plays into this when you're talking to potential customers, because a lot of brokerage owners, they only know the way they've done it for 20 years or what their friends' brokerages, do. I feel like there probably has to be a lot of education, when you're doing these, discovery calls with these different, brokerage owners about, training in general.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. There's a distinct difference between, and this is like more information that you need about my sales process, but like when I'm talking to somebody who is just a broker versus someone who is like in an L&D role at a brokerage, a lot of the time, the first 10 minutes of my conversation with someone whose only background is brokerage is explaining to them why training is important. Like I need to set some groundwork and kind of level set on the fact that training is something that you should be doing. And like, it's going to help you make more money before I even get into the demo. Folks who are in like HR and L&D and training already, they kind of get it. So it's a much different conversation.
Is that almost the biggest or bigger hurdle, like explaining the value of training than explaining the value of your product sometimes?
Yes. Like it sounds silly to say, but like I hear tech companies say this sometimes where like their biggest competition is the status quo. And that's kind of been true for us to a degree, right? Like we need to really like put into the world like why training is important. And that's part of the reason why you see me posting so much on LinkedIn and other social media about training and why it's so important is like people need to start having these conversations and raising awareness of the fact that training is a huge issue for people.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with it 100%. And I don't know, at least my feed, I see a lot of people on the carrier side talking about it. And I dispatched trucks for a while, and I ran into it quite often where I'd be dealing with a broker or a company, and it was just quite frustrating, right? Some of the practices or things that were going on. So what I at least see a lot is maybe the beginning, right? Like people are going to give them I don't want to say the ground rules, but like the bare minimum, right? And then from there, it's kind of figured out as you go. And then as an effect of that, like a lot of people sometimes like harmed, right? Like they're suffering the consequences of the lack of training for somebody being out there with no range, just kind of going for it.
Yeah, I mean, looking exclusively at new hire training, it's funny. New hire training typically falls into three kind of buckets when I'm talking to brokers. Bucket one is kind of what you were alluding to, like earlier in the conversation. Hey man, here's a load board and a phone. Like, good luck. Let's see what happens. Right. And you can imagine how successful that is. Bucket two tends to be your classic desk ride, right? Like you're going to shadow different individuals for the next 2 weeks in different roles. You're going to learn from them. And then after 2 weeks, you're kind of on your own. And then bucket three is the crash course in logistics, right? You're going to do like 1 or 2 weeks of classroom training, and then your training basically stops. But the problem, like, good job training people, but at the same time, how much of that are you going to remember in 6 months? And how much of that's actually relevant to the job that you're going to be doing? I say that because, go ahead.
I was going to say, even with the crash course, if it's cradle to grave, right? You go through this crash course and maybe operation stuff, but then you got to go build a book. So you're making all these cold calls. So by the time that you actually get the freight and you need to do the operations, all the information's gone.
Mm-hmm.
At least I don't know. I would think that would be the case quite often.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I use that example not just because I see it in the industry, but like that's what my training was like when I was both trained myself and when I was training people. Like I didn't sit here just like wake up one day, oh my God, I'm amazing at training. I'm still mediocre at training, but like I've screwed up a lot of things over the course of my career. And I remember sitting there like my first week in freight, and I was learning about how ZAR lights impact LTL pricing. And looking back, dude, why on earth was I learning about that? Like my job the following week is going to be calling drivers and asking if they're loaded. In what world do I need to know how ZAR lights impact LTL pricing? I don't. So like that's another area where brokers just kind of missed the boat because they don't really tailor the training to the specific roles that these people are going into. It's just, hey, here's everything you need to know. Let's see what sticks.
I'm glad you brought that up. So I think that's probably why you hit on continued training too. Like, of knowing some of those things might be more important later on when you're in a different role, but when you know nothing about logistics, learning about, all this in-depth stuff probably isn't important, but somebody who might be there 3-4 years, there might be different type of training. And you don't really hear, I could be wrong out there, but there's a lot of brokerages, I believe, that don't do any training beyond the initial training. It's just first couple of weeks and then, you're on your own.
No, you're spot on. So we created Sync to one, address the new hire portion. And then two, if you're taking the words out of my mouth, is to address the more experienced hires. More often than not, training stops after that initial training period. Once you're a carrier rep, booking freight, making X amount of money, the mentality tends to be like, oh, they're good. Right? Like they don't need more training. But the reality is they do, right? Am I echoing for you guys? Or is it just me?
You're echoing a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. We can understand you fine. You're pretty clear. It's just it's nothing crazy. I think you're fine.
Okay. It'll go away, hopefully. All right. Where was I? Oh yeah. So like training should be a continuous process, right? So it's not just new hires, right? Like you got new hire stuff. You've got like more advanced role specific training people need. Eventually you get into management training. People eventually need like personal and professional development training too. So like really this training that you go through should be a continuous process throughout your entire tenure at a company and beyond that.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like it's such a good idea, or I'm just not I'm not familiar with a lot of other companies that are doing things like this. And we've got another guest tomorrow, Will Jenkins Journey. They're doing training, but I don't see a lot of companies doing what you guys are doing, and I feel like there's so much opportunity and such a big impact that you can make. Because pretty much any broker is a potential customer, and they're likely all need it. At least the small to mid-sized companies.
Yeah, and I'm actually surprised by how many larger brokerages also need help with training. I don't want to sit here name dropping larger companies, but there are a surprising amount of companies who are 200 mil plus whose training is effectively non-existent. I always sit here wonder how they manage to wing it up to that size, but a lot of them kind of have, man. So it's not limited to small and mid-sized brokers. Some large brokers really struggle with training as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, what you're talking about is pretty in depth, right? When you're considering full spectrum training from day one to continued, and then you're even talking about all this different development. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, if you have other stuff going on, right? So, I mean, there's definitely a need for it, and I'm sure that it's. I mean, as we've been discussing, it's often overlooked.
Yeah, and it's probably one of the top things that gets deprioritized in a brokerage, particularly when markets turn, right? And I get it. It's not directly revenue producing, and brokers tend to think in terms of things that are revenue producing, right? I need revenue now. I don't need revenue 6 months from now. But that's a shame because that's how you should, that long-term approach is what you need when you start thinking about training and other technology investments, for instance, right?
Yeah.
Training someone today is not going to amount to more loads on your board tomorrow, right? It's just not going to. But what it will amount to is more loads on your board 6 months from now in a more sustainable business, and that's what you want. It's not going to give you that quick, that quick bolt of new loads tomorrow, but overall it's going to make your business more successful.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that applies to just that concept where you're talking about. It applies to a lot of things in life, right? We want it tomorrow, immediately, but really the sustainable small ways, investing for the long term. Matt, I didn't mean to interrupt you. If you want to go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I wonder if that's the challenge too in this kind of market, that they don't see instant results the next day, and it's a down market, so they're like, we can't afford to invest in training, whereas now if they don't invest in training when the market flips, then they're probably going to maybe see more of the effects, but they're thinking just in today, and not seeing necessarily the long-term benefits of training.
Yeah, we've definitely experienced some of that. Brokers tend to be very reactive when it comes to adopting new technology or just changes within their organization. It's funny when you look at things like capacity tech, right? Any technology that helps you find additional carriers. When do people really want it? When the market's tight and they're struggling to find carriers. All of a sudden they're like, oh my God, let me buy capacity tech. It just flies off the shelves, metaphorically. On the flip side, when the market's slower and people aren't having trouble finding carriers, they all start canceling their contracts and nobody wants capacity tech anymore, right? When it doesn't really make sense to do things that way. It's just reactive. And the same thing happens with training, right? And and hiring, right? Right now, people want sales reps to get customers historically for the past several months because the market's been slow. Well, maybe that's something you should have been thinking about while it was easy to land customers. That we'd be more prepared for this market because it always happens.
No, I've seen that too. Just now you're starting to see some carrier sales roles come up, but I feel like for the last 6 months you saw almost zero of them. Anyone I knew who does recruiting was telling me they're not hiring carrier sales right now.
Yeah. And the smart brokers out there have maintained their hiring practices that way, and their technology investments and stuff like that. That way they're not just prepared for what's happening today. They continue to be prepared for the next market shift. That's where you want to be.
Yeah. I mean, taking a proactive approach as opposed to reactive, right? So if you're set up and geared, so if and when it does pick up, you're prepped to take advantage of it. But if you're not, right, you're not investing in the training and the people, and then it picks up and then you're trying to do it, you kind of miss the wave, so to speak. I don't know. It's kind of like a stock, right? A stock skyrockets and it's going up. It's you want to get in where you're too late, most likely, to really take advantage of it.
That's a great analogy. That's exactly what brokers do. I'm generalizing a lot. Like there are brokers who do like a very good job with training and hiring technology, but like a lot of them really struggle with this kind of stuff because they tend to be very reactive with all of their decisions.
Yeah.
What's the best way for them to use? So say like a brokerage, signs up for your services. Like what's the best way to utilize it? Like the same thing with tech. I mean, you could have all the great training, but if you don't, put the processes and utilize it correctly. So are you kind of training people on how, I guess this kind of sounds weird, but training people on how to use the training too? Cause like if they just, throw people, hey, go sit on this computer and, is there any kind of like structure to how you recommend people use your training?
That's actually a really good question, and something that we have been putting a lot of thought into over the past like year or two that we've been in business, because just like any technology, adoption is always going to be a problem, right? And what we found, I'm going to sell against myself for a minute here, is that the biggest hurdle in terms of getting people to actually do the training is you need to have somebody like internal at the company who's going to own the process. If it's just the CEO who thinks that you need more training and he like onboards Sync just because he wants people to do more training, and kind of his pet project, but he doesn't like sit there and follow through with it, literally no one's going to do it. Like as nice as it is to say that people want all of this training, like they do, but not many people are out there proactively sitting at their desk going, man, instead of booking this load, I want to go do some employee training. Like this just doesn't work that way. So the most successful customers that we have somebody internal who really owns the process and holds people accountable for doing the training.
Yeah, I think that's applicable beyond training. Like a lot of software that people implement, if somebody doesn't own it, right, you might get these like awesome tools and they can do everything, but if you don't own it and implement it, you're not using it, then it's viewed as like worthless. Because I don't know, at least that's what I've experienced. It's very important to have somebody own any kind of implementation.
Yeah, and like that, it's certainly not unique to us. Like you're right, it's across all technology. And to go a little bit deeper into that point, our customers who have the most success using Sync, we have a lot of different use cases, right? The most successful ones we have really like work with us to kind of build out learning paths for their employees. Like what we kind of like you said earlier, if you just throw a bunch of content to people and say, here you go, good luck, right? Like no one's going to do it. They don't really know where to start. They don't know what they should be doing. So part of our onboarding process is like helping you figure out what the structure should be. Like what should your new hires be going through week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, and so on, right? Like if you have some experienced carrier sales reps or experienced customer sales reps, what kind of content might be relevant for them for like either review or upskilling purposes, right? And then kind of plot that out over time. Like that's where we see the most success in terms of getting adoption and getting people using the training. So yes, to an extent, we do need to, train people on how to do training.
It sounds kind of weird, but I was, training.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. So I guess your platform is what you're describing right now, talking about, plotting points or whatnot. Are they able to build it out, or do you have preset like training structures? Like would it vary, say if it's a 20-person brokerage versus a 100-person brokerage, or, like are there different levels or mm-hmm. programs and that sort of thing? Or can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, everyone's going to train people a little bit differently, right? We have, specifically for new hires, some rough templates they could follow that we consider to be kind of standardized new hire training. I don't think anyone that we have follows them exactly. Everyone's going to have their own twist, their own like order in which they want the courses. But like we give people the ability to kind of customize these things a little bit and build out their own paths. And the content that we've got, we've specifically built our courses really short in like micro learning segments, if you will, right? So like most of our courses are probably 15, 20 minutes tops. Like as much as I would like to sit here and talk to somebody for 2 hours about how to source capacity, like no one's going to listen to me for 2 hours. Like no freight broker in the world is going to sit through that. So we made things deliberately to the point. We broke things into smaller segments. It also gives them the ability to mix and match more easily, right? So to your point, if it's a 20-person company versus a 100-person company, the more often we see the differences in operating model, calls. So if you're like cradle to grave versus buy sell versus some weird pod mix, different people are going to need different content at different stages, right? Like if you're cradle to grave, like you might need a mix of account management, customer sales content, and carrier sales content pretty quick. Whereas if you're like a buy sell model, you might be more focused on one particular area. So having these smaller courses allows people to kind of mix and match and build those learning paths that fit their roles. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay,
I think
cool.
kind of what you're describing. I think it's important.
You got me rambling on some stuff, so I wasn't sure I was answering questions.
No, everything you're saying, I mean, I'm finding it very interesting and helpful. And I think, to your point, like there is such a thing as too much information. So I kind of like that, people have the ability to kind of mix and match or set what's applicable versus what's not. Because I mean, if you throw, if hypothetically you throw kind of what you were describing earlier, right, where you're learning about some kind of weird LTL thing, and you're like, I don't have anything to do with it, right? So that information is not relevant. So the ability to kind of pick and choose and work through what you want them exposed to, as opposed to just kind of this blanket training, because again, everybody's gonna be a little bit differently. We all do the same thing, but we all do it a little bit differently, right? So like one thing might be more helpful than another.
Yeah, and another point I just want to add on that is that, like I mentioned, how no one wants to sit through a 2-hour-long video. Also, no one wants to sit through 2 hours of shorter 5-minute videos, right? Like that also sucks.
Same thing,
yeah. So I mean, it's a little bit better, but it's not great. So what we've done is we've tried to break up our content with things like activities and knowledge checks, and we have these cool simulated calls. That way you're not just sitting there staring at video content. We're trying to incorporate different learning modalities. That way people just learn more effectively. It breaks up the content, and you have some like ways to actually apply what you're learning, and you're not just staring at your screen. So you'll go from like a video to reading about it in text to taking like a little quiz about it. And then from there, maybe you'll jump into a simulation where you can have these practice calls to kind of practice what you learned in that training.
That's cool. Yeah, keeping people's engagement or like concentration. Yeah. I mean, even now, like I'm doing some school stuff on the side, and I'll just be clicking through it, and I'll be on it for 30 minutes. But I mean, I can't recall anything that I just did. I'm bouncing around. It's not really interactive, right? So I think that's cool that you guys are finding ways to ensure that you have their attention, that they're actually getting something out of it, not just doing it to do it, but actually learning, right?
Yeah, I've started doing these like learning and development webinars once a month. I got my second one, so like I say once a month, but I've done one of them, and second is upcoming. But like one of the big things that like the L&D folks that I have on there talk about is like you should never have training just to click a box. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of training kind of devolves into. You throw somebody whatever training you got, like your HR training, and they just click the box. Like, okay, we did training. They didn't learn anything. They don't know how to act on any of that training. But we checked the box. We did the training. Like our goal was for this to actually be stuff that people can act on after they do it. Because like you don't really care what people know. Like you care what they can do. So our goal with Sync is being able to get people to actually do things after they do our training.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Just taking things like from an idealistic perspective to just realistic, maybe like an actuality, practicality. What can they do with it? Like, if you got a good score on this quiz, but when you actually need to translate it into operations to help you as a worker, like are you able to use it, right? So I think that's some great stuff there.
Yeah, and that's where. Okay,
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say. Like, that's why we get so excited about some of these simulated calls that we have. Because, dude, I can talk to you all day about how to call a driver and ask if he's loaded or not, right? You don't really know what it's like until you call that driver. Like, if you think back to your first time calling a driver or calling a prospect, like, it's terrifying, right? Like, you don't know what this person's going to say. Like, it could be ridiculous. Who knows? So we've got these simulated calls you can kind of pop in, and you can practice these phone calls in a nice low risk environment and just increase your comfort levels on the phone before you start fumbling your way through live calls.
Yeah, that's even. So I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but some of the like AI stuff, like I've seen some of these like 30-second clips of this AI talking to a driver. It's like, well, it's great because it's like a very expected response, and you've got it pre-programmed. Like when you call some drivers, it just gets weird. Things happen. They start saying something you don't know how to deal with it. Is it programmed? So I mean, it goes back to maybe like idealistically or like testing to sell on like a quick clip versus practicality. So no, I think all this stuff is super interesting to me.
Yeah. And like we partnered with a company called SimTrain, and they do like a little bit of what you're talking about, right? Like they use AI to help generate these simulated calls, and that's what we use, right? Like it's not going to give you a new response every single time, but we have enough scenarios built out that like you can get exposure to a bunch of different things happening, right? You call the driver to see if he's loaded. Okay. First scenario, he says he's loaded and he's on his way. Amazing, right? Second scenario, well, now he's not loaded yet, but he's getting worked on and things are probably okay. Third scenario, well, he's not loaded yet and they haven't been giving him a door and he's been there for an hour and a half. So like, all right, now what's happening? Fourth scenario, you call up the driver. He doesn't know where he is, right? Like he's just driving down some road somewhere in the wrong state. And now you got to figure, okay, now what do I do? So give yourself different scenarios. It's like mock calls, right? Without having to actually pull somebody off the floor to do them with you.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious how I see some of these AI stuff for like dealing with carrier sales, and some people saying it's going to, take over carrier sales. But for that exact reason you just explained, unless you've actually done it in all the different scenarios, it's hard to like pre-prompt, a robot to be able to deal with every situation a driver might tell you,
Yeah, I've seen those for the carrier sales calls. You're talking like the negotiations. They're super cool. I tend to be in the boat that's like, well, they're always gonna have to pass it off to a real human being eventually. And that real human being is probably going to want to double check all that information anyway. So like now we've just doubled the time for the carrier. I don't know. I have mixed feelings on it. I think it's super cool, but I have mixed feelings.
We have a comment from Jeremy. It looks like we use SimTrain as well and love it.
Good. We have a partnership with them. We also love them.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in, Jeremy. Yeah, a lot of that AI stuff, it's all interesting. I guess we'll see how it plays out, right? But I'm of the, I don't know, the school of thought or belief that like all this tech is great to improve, like actual workers' efficiency, but not to replace them. I don't think that we're anywhere close to that. Yeah, you see some of these videos and it's like, but yeah, I mean, you can make a video look really good in a certain situation, but what you're doing with it, like using it as a training aid, I think that's great. And there's, obviously use case for it there.
Yeah. I mean, my whole tech spiel is that like what you said, right? I mean, technology is there to help people do their jobs better and to focus on the things that they're good at and take away the things that suck. Like there are definitely things that human beings are doing right now that they probably shouldn't be doing, like ingesting pricing. Let me just ingest all of this data and like they just noodle on it for a while and then spit out a rate. Well, come on, guys. That's not what human beings are designed to do. Like, what do you like? You're bumping the rate up 5 cents a mile because the hot market map is pale pink. What does that even mean? You've done that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. That's so. I'll say this. So I got kind of active on LinkedIn like 18 months to 2 years ago, and I always kind of thought I would hear about like these pricing stuff, automating it. And we're a people-centric company and remain that way, right? We're Birmingham, Alabama, and I was always like, man, computers, they can't price freight. They can't. They're great at it. They're better than human beings. Especially, man, training. So, back to what you do, right? So if you're able to automate that and take that away from humans, something like that, you don't have to train them all up on it. So like the time, resources, and just opportunity cost of that. It makes a lot of sense for a lot of ways. So like, yeah, maybe there's one person out of every however many that's been doing it a while and that might outperform this pricing tool, but with large mass, it makes sense, right? So no, yeah. I agree with you there 100%. And I didn't always feel or think that way.
Yeah. And like one more thing to kind of add on the technology, like spiel that we're on right now is like technology doesn't really take away jobs. Like it just creates different ones. Think about electricity, right? Electricity took away a ton of jobs, but like no one's out there complaining that they can't be a lamplighter anymore. Like that profession's gone, but like you've opened up so many other possibilities to people. Like that's what technology always does.
That's interesting. I really like that. I hadn't thought about it that way.
I hadn't thought about that either. So I was smiling. I was like, that's a great point.
It makes a lot of sense. Nick, we've got or go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just like, and that's the same thing's going to happen with technology in the transportation space. Like pricing is a good example. Yeah, it might take away like that pricing responsibility from individual seat level users, but like you're going to need somebody to kind of manage the overarching pricing strategy of the organization now, right? Like who's going to manage that technology? Like it's just going to create different jobs.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's a great way to put it, and I really appreciate you sharing that insight. Something to think on, man. We gotta wrap it up. Matt and I both have got a call at 3, man. It's been a pleasure having you on. I feel like we have so much more to talk about. We're gonna have to have you on again at another date, man, because there's a lot to unpack, especially ending on that note. I want to pick your brain on quite a few things.
Yeah, it was fun. It went by really fast. I felt like we just had a lot to talk about with training, so it was fun.
Yeah, like if you ever want me to talk about a subject for hours on end, start talking about training or like brokerage operations. Love to talk about both of those things. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I know you had to jump. If anyone ever wants to reach out to me, I'm Nick. My email is nick@synclogisticstraining.com, or just find me on LinkedIn. I'm potentially overly active on there. So
if you're on LinkedIn, Nick's if you're involved in the brokerage space, he's a must follow. As I said at the beginning, he's constantly posting really just quick, great tidbits of information to improve your efficiency and just how you see things. So Nick, yeah, it was a pleasure to have you on, man. Thanks for spending your afternoon with us. And like I said, man, we got to do it again at some point.
100%.
Of course. All right. Anytime. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Nick.
Awesome.
That was fun.
Yeah, man. That was he said quite a few things that got me thinking. I'll be thinking about them all day, especially that last part about technology.
Oh, the lamp. Yeah.
Yeah. Seems like a very smart guy. It's a cool thing he's doing. There's definitely a need for, training in this space. So yeah, man, he was a great guest. And I really enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, 100%, man. It'll be fun back tomorrow with Will Jenkins to talk more training, and shout out to our sponsors, Multi-Service Fuel Card, been around since 1978. If you're looking for fuel for your company, or even if you're a brokerage looking to add a fuel card, highly recommend you reach out to Jessica over there. Great people, great company. Shout out Black Box, where Will's at, HD. If you're looking to be an agent, hit me up. Sales Dash, freight specific CRM, fantastic. TAFs, like we said earlier, I mean, top 10 factoring company, great communication, great people, good rates, and obviously Trio for doing our back end.
Yeah, 100%. We'll be back at it tomorrow at 1 p.m., I believe, with Will Jenkins, co-founder Molo, CEO, founder of Journey, another training company. They're doing some exciting things in this space. So join us tomorrow. We'll be back at it.
Sounds good. See you tomorrow, Will.
All right. See you, man.